At the end of the Second World War, Hitler's personal belongings were scattered among his residences, his bunker in Berlin, and the places where he had spent his final days. Many of those items were taken by Allied soldiers, others ended up in museums, some were destroyed, and several remain missing. Each object held a story that spoke of his routine, his tastes, or his ideas. From simple desk tools to personal gifts or propaganda items, these elements passed into civilian or state hands, almost always without an official plan. Some were auctioned years later, others were kept as souvenirs or evidence. What seemed ordinary gained significance simply because it had been near him. Over time, researchers, collectors, and museums began tracing the whereabouts of these pieces. The books that document these cases help to understand not only what the objects were, but also where they ended up and what was done with them. Nothing was invented or idealized. Everything included really existed. What were some of those objects, and what happened to them after the war? The watercolor box that Hitler used before becoming a dictator. This dented, enamel-covered metal box with well-worn watercolors, manufactured in 1910 by the Redeker and Hennis Company of Nuremberg, belonged to Adolf Hitler. Belgian war correspondent Robert Frankot took it from the drawer of Hitler's desk in his Munich apartment on Prinzregentenstrasse in May of 1945. It is a glimpse into a lesser-known part of his life, his intention to become an artist. If what he wrote in Mein Kampf is true, Hitler made the decision to dedicate himself to art when he was 12 years old. With the full support of his widowed mother, who adored him, he insisted that he would one day be a renowned painter. He left school in 1905 to pursue that goal. 2 years later, he traveled to Vienna with the idea of entering the Academy of Fine Arts. Carrying a portfolio of his drawings, he was confident, according to what he later said, that he would pass the exam without any problem. Although his paintings are often criticized, Hitler did know how to draw with some technique. Even before arriving in Vienna, he always carried his sketchbook, drawing parts of buildings he liked or sets for the operas he dreamed of writing. According to his childhood friend August Kubizek, on sunny days he would often sit on a bench on Turmleitenweg in Linz, where he set up a sort of open-air studio. There he would read, draw and paint with watercolors. When he left Linz to live in Vienna, Hitler felt confident about getting into the academy. He claimed he had been by far the best in his school's drawing class and that he had advanced more than average since then. But he wasn't lucky. Although he was allowed to take the entrance exam, the judges rejected his drawings for being weak and said he had included too few faces. Upset, he tried again the following year, but that time they didn't even let him take the test. That second rejection haunted him for the rest of his life. In the years that followed, Hitler survived on what little he earned selling drawings, first in Vienna and then in Munich. He claimed to have painted between 700 and 800 works, which he sold for about 5 marks each. His painting style was simple, direct, and based on reality. His subjects were almost always buildings, flowers, or open landscapes. "I paint what people want," he once said. He paid close attention to detail, especially architectural elements, but almost never included people, a flaw that had already been pointed out to him. When the war began in 1914, Hitler took his watercolors to the Western Front. There he painted what he saw around him. The painting shown on the opposite page, made in December of that year, depicts a monastery in ruins after being hit by bombs in Messines, south of Ypres. It is unclear whether at that moment he still thought about dedicating himself to art, or whether he was doing it just as a hobby. What is certain is that during his first leave he went to Berlin and visited several art galleries. Although for a time he fantasized about trying again to enter an art school after the war, politics soon took up all his interest. From then on, drawing was reduced to simple doodles or marginal notes, including some architectural plans that would later appear in the Germania project to redesign Berlin. See Hitler's Germania sketch, pages 101 to 102. Despite having stopped painting, Hitler imposed his taste on the regime's culture. He rejected Goebbels' preference for modern art and decreed that the official style had to be classical, with idealized family scenes in kitschy tones. He supported artists such as sculptor Arno Breker, while more innovative designers, like those of the Bauhaus movement, were expelled from the country. Hitler's own paintings were erased from the map. Trusted individuals were sent to buy them wherever they were. Only a few were ever published. In 1937, displaying those paintings was prohibited. But over the years, several appeared at auctions. Some ended up selling for more than 100,000 euros. The watercolor box, however, was sold for 8,000 euros in 2010. Hitler said that not getting into the Vienna Academy had made him stronger, but deep down he never got over it. That rejection changed the course of his life. It was the point where he left behind his dreams of being a painter and began to accumulate rage. It is impossible to know for certain, but it is likely that this frustration influenced, in some way, everything that came afterward. The bloodstained Nazi flag that disappeared after the war. If Nazism is thought of as a kind of political religion, then the Blutfahne, or blood flag, was one of its most revered symbols. At first, it was just a swastika flag belonging to the 5th Unit of Munich's SA stormtroopers, known as Hitler's brown shirts. But during the failed coup attempt in November of 1923, the flag became stained with the blood of 3 dead men: Anton Hechenberger, Lorenz Ritter von Stransky-Grippenfeld, and Andreas Bauriedl. They fell when Bavarian police opened fire on the demonstrators. After being released from prison in December of 1924, Hitler recovered the flag. From that moment on, it became the centerpiece of Nazi ceremonies. A new ornament with the swastika was added to its tip, along with a silver ring bearing the names of the 3 men who had died in the 1923 putsch. From then on, it was not only displayed at all major party events, but Hitler also used it to touch other Nazi flags and thereby give them a kind of blessing, as well as to seal the oath of new SS members. The blood flag was treated as though it were a sacred relic. When not in use, it was carefully stored in the entrance hall of the Nazi party headquarters, known as the Brown House in Munich. Its importance was such that it had a dedicated custodian, a relatively minor SS member named Jakob Grimminger, who wore a toothbrush mustache. His only task was to accompany the flag to every event across the country. Grimminger appears on a propaganda postcard from 1937, lowering the blood flag in front of one of the pyres lit before the Feldherrnhalle in Munich, where the annual commemoration of the failed coup took place. Below the image, the caption read, "In memory of the 9th of November, 1923. The last time the flag was seen was in October of 1944 in Berlin, when it was used during the swearing-in ceremony of the first members of the Volkssturm. This group was created as the regime's last line of defense, composed of teenagers and older men. After that event, the flag disappeared. It is possible that it survived, perhaps stored and forgotten in an attic in some neighborhood in the United States, mistakenly taken by a soldier in 1945. But it is more likely that it was destroyed when an Allied bombing severely damaged the Brown House in January of 1945, or that it was lost amid the chaos that followed the collapse of the Nazi regime. The decorative plate that showed Hitler's most heavily guarded house. It is curious that when Hitler first went to Obersalzberg, he was looking for a place to get away. Over time, that retreat, and the house he had built there, would become one of the most well-known addresses of the Third Reich. He first came to know Obersalzberg in 1923, when his ideological mentor, the nationalist writer Dietrich Eckart, went into hiding in the area to escape the police. Hitler joined him in a modest boarding house, using the false name Mr. Wolf, and was enchanted by the landscape. In 1925, he rented a small rural home called Haus Wachenfeld. Later, thanks to the profits he began receiving from the sales of Mein Kampf, he bought the property, which he would eventually turn into the Berghof. He later remarked on how important that place was to him. "When I go to Obersalzberg, it's not just because of the beauty of the place. I feel far from petty things, and that makes my mind work better. If I deal with a subject elsewhere, I see it more vaguely. I'm overwhelmed by the details. At night, from my bed, I spend hours looking at the moonlit mountains, and that's when the ideas come to me." After he was appointed Chancellor in 1933, that house gradually became a sort of mandatory pilgrimage site. At first, locals came by, then people from farther away, hoping to catch a glimpse of the new leader. In those early years, security was almost non-existent. Until 1936, Hitler used to walk the trails without much company or with an informal guard. Sometimes hikers greeted him and he waved back, but that changed. The place became a center of the cult of his personality. Security was reinforced, the area was fenced and patrolled, and SS guards managed the crowds who came to greet him. For many of those visitors, a trip to Obersalzberg wasn't complete without taking something back. One of the typical souvenirs was a wall plate made of porcelain, like the one shown on the previous page. It was manufactured by the Rosenthal Company in Munich, hand-painted and glazed, and depicted the Haus Wachenfeld as it looked in 1934, after the first renovations that added a garage and a small terrace. In the background were the peaks of Reiter Alpe, and to the right the lower mountains of the Untersberg, the place where, according to legend, Emperor Frederick Barbarossa sleeps, awaiting his return. While the house was being immortalized in porcelain, the real one kept transforming. In 1935, Hitler ordered its expansion. He wanted the place to better reflect his image as head of state. The first phase was completed in 1936 and expanded again in 1939. His guests were stunned. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and former British Prime Minister David Lloyd George all toured its enormous halls, the grand terrace with a mountain view, and most notably the giant window that overlooked the valley and could be raised or lowered with the press of a button. By then, the Berghof was the centre of a small Nazi city. There was a barracks with more than 2,000 soldiers, as well as houses for high-ranking officials like Martin Bormann, Hermann Göring, and Albert Speer. The earlier tranquility had completely vanished. The entire area was surrounded by a double barbed wire fence 2 meters high. To enter, one had to pass through 2 SS-controlled checkpoints. Even the neighbours were evicted. Bormann, Hitler's ambitious personal secretary, managed to take over the surrounding land through pressure, forced payments, or threats of sending people to concentration camps. As a result, Hitler became almost a prisoner when he was there. The era of smiles and souvenirs was long gone. Since Hitler's staff and much of the government accompanied him to the Berghof, construction continued at a fast pace. A government office was even created in the valley, in Stangasse. Hitler spent long periods on the mountain, surrounded by his closest collaborators and high-level visitors. Key decisions were made there, such as the signing of the pact with the USSR in 1939, or the attack on the Soviet Union in 1941. Obersalzberg became almost an alternate capital of the regime. Toward the end of the war, underground tunnels were excavated, and the area was fortified against bombings. What had once been a refuge in the Alps turned into a site full of construction, and even the locals began to grow tired. Hitler said that when everything was over, he wanted to buy himself a simple little house, but that quiet retirement never came. In April of 1945, just 1 week before he took his own life in Berlin, a British air raid hit Obersalzberg. Part of the Berghof was damaged, and many areas of the complex were destroyed. Then, amid the chaos of the collapse, the SS themselves set the place on fire. Shortly afterward, the 101st Airborne Division of the United States arrived and completely looted it. In 1952, what was left of the Berghof was demolished with explosives by order of the Bavarian government to prevent it from becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Today, the only thing that remains is a moss-covered concrete wall, lost among the trees and the remnants of the forest. The lipstick case that Eva Braun left in the bunker. Eva Braun was a key figure in the history of the Third Reich. She was Hitler's romantic partner and companion for over 10 years. They met in 1929, when she was working as an assistant at Heinrich Hoffmann's photography studio in Munich. 3 years later, she began a relationship that would define her entire life. In the end, she shared his death, taking her own life alongside her husband on April 30th, 1945, in the Reich Chancellery bunker. Her youth was very normal. Born in 1912 into a middle-class family in Munich, she attended a Catholic school, earning average grades. She later found work with Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer. Blonde and blue-eyed, she had a striking appearance. Hoffmann said she looked like a doll. She was cheerful, liked to have fun, and had a carefree attitude, though overall she was an ordinary young woman. Albert Speer once said that historians would one day be disappointed by her. Her relationship with Hitler was indeed strange, especially because it was kept so hidden. Although it began in late 1932, Eva remained completely in the background. Unlike Geli Raubal, she wasn't allowed to appear publicly with Hitler. On the rare occasions she accompanied him, like on a trip to Italy in 1938, she was disguised as part of Hoffmann's photography team. That caution was part of Hitler's total control over his image, especially after the scandal over Geli's suicide in 1931. That's why he would repeat that he was married to the German people. For the next 12 years, Eva Braun lived in the shadows. Although she was close to Hitler's inner circle in Obersalzberg, the German public had no idea she existed. At first, that ambiguous role was hard for her. She was not recognized as a wife or as a lover. Perhaps that's why she attempted suicide twice, in 1932 and in 1935. In her diary, on her birthday in 1935, she wrote, "Today I turned 23, but that doesn't mean I'm happy. At this moment I definitely am not." Over time, she got used to the secluded life she had with Hitler. Although she had to disappear whenever he received an official guest at the Berghof, outside of those moments she lived as the lady of the house, bringing a more relaxed atmosphere. Staff at Obersalzberg recalled her comfortable and very luxurious routine. She changed clothes a couple of times a day and regularly had her hairdresser visit. She also used to walk her 2 dogs, Negus and Stasi, or read novels in her free time. She lacked for nothing. She had a full team of assistants who were not allowed to say her name outside the residence. She was always well-dressed and frequently wore the gifts she received from Hitler: gold watches, jewelry, and decorative objects. Albert Speer even designed a symbol for her with her initials EB in the shape of a clover, which ended up engraved on many of her belongings. That design appears, for example, inside a highly decorated lipstick case made of Italian silver. That case, like other items of hers, was likely given later to someone on the Berghof staff. Paradoxically, Hitler wasn't very pleased with Eva's flashy style. He didn't like her constant outfit changes and didn't understand her interest in fashion. He had a very strict view of beauty and preferred women to be discreet, with little makeup. Once, upon seeing a napkin stained with lipstick, he surprised his secretaries with his absurd theory that such cosmetics were made with fat from Paris sewers. To make matters worse, Hitler held rather outdated ideas about women. While not unusual for the time, his views likely didn't sit well with Eva. In one conversation, he told someone that a woman should be soft, tender, naive, and dumb. On another occasion, he boasted that he didn't need women to be intelligent. "I have enough ideas for both of us," he said. Perhaps in Eva Braun he found exactly what he wanted: a beautiful, affectionate woman who never contradicted him. The exact nature of the bond between Hitler and Eva Braun is still analyzed by some historians. Some speculate on intimate details or suggest that Eva may have had some influence on the Nazi leader's decisions. But the most reasonable conclusion seems to be the simplest. Eva Braun had no political weight, and her presence did not affect major decisions. As Speer had said, she was politically irrelevant. Like it or not, her role was more decorative than anything else. After Eva Braun's death in April of 1945, one of Hitler's secretaries entered the bunker room. Among the remnants of what had happened, she saw a small metal tube on the floor. From its shape, it looked like one of the many cosmetic cases Eva usually kept with her. It was identical to the one she used to store her lipstick. The giant drawing with which Hitler wanted to remake Berlin. Beyond his destructive political career, Hitler has long been described as a frustrated artist who found some form of escape in architectural plans. First through Paul Ludwig Troost, and later with Albert Speer and other collaborators, he channeled that artistic impulse by sketching capitals, rooflines, entrances and facades in projects like the redesign of Linz or a new opera house in Berlin. But the sketch shown here wasn't just a hobby or a random doodle. It was part of something much bigger, the complete redesign of Berlin and its transformation into a new city called Germania. The plan was given the green light in 1937, with Speer leading the project. From the beginning, the idea didn't hold back in ambition. It proposed reorganizing Berlin entirely, with 2 major avenues crossing each other, along with new stations, entire neighborhoods, airports, green zones, and even the removal of non-native plants. When Speer's father saw the plans, he simply said, "You've all gone completely mad." The 2 main avenues, one running east to west and the other north to south, were to be the axis of Germania's most emblematic buildings. According to Hitler, those structures were meant to inspire a sense of grandeur in the German people and represent the country's glory to future generations. Among them was the Great Hall, which would stand over 300 meters tall and hold space for 180,000 party members. There was also the Circus, a 200-meter-wide fountain filled with bronze statues and a central figure of Apollo. The most important part of the project was the Triumphal Arch, which can be seen in the original drawing made by Hitler. Speer recalled that this arch was the clearest example of Hitler's architectural fantasies, enormous in scale and excessive in intention. Although he tried to modify the design to make it more realistic, he eventually gave up. The drawing was Hitler's. Speer knew it, and he reflected it in the final plans with a false signature. Instead of signing, he wrote 3 X's, knowing that everyone would understand who the anonymous author of the design was. That arch was meant to be a monument to honor the German soldiers who died in the First World War. 1.8 million names were to be engraved on 75 giant marble plaques. Its scale was so exaggerated that the Arc de Triomphe in Paris could easily fit inside its 80-meter-wide central opening. To give an idea of the size, in the lower right part of the drawing, Hitler sketched tiny lines representing people. The arch was so massive that doubts arose about whether it could physically be built. In an area in southern Berlin, near where it was to be constructed, a test was done. A solid concrete block weighing 12,600 tons, called Schwerbelastungskörper, or heavy load-bearing body. This block had sensors to measure whether Berlin's soil could support something so heavy. It was never clear if the data from that experiment would have stopped the project or changed Hitler's mind. What did stop it was the war. In 1943, the Germania plan was officially cancelled. Almost nothing had been completed. The concrete block, however, was not destroyed. It was too big. To this day it still stands, stained by rain, worn down by time. It is one of the few physical remnants of Hitler's obsession with building something eternal. Hitler's armored car that was found by the soldiers. Hitler always showed a strong obsession with cars, especially those made by Mercedes-Benz. That connection began early. In 1924, while still imprisoned in Landsberg, he ordered a Mercedes with a supercharged engine, possibly a 24-100 model. After leaving prison, he bought it for an enormous sum for the time, 26,000 Reichsmarks. In the years that followed, he acquired more vehicles. He read car catalogues closely and stayed up to date with all the latest technical developments. He even claimed to have sent sketches to Mercedes-Benz and said that some of the brand's design ideas were his. In 1931, he received a top-tier model, the Mercedes-Benz 770, with an 8-cylinder, 7.7-litre engine. At the time, it was the most expensive car the company offered. The vehicle was personally delivered by driver Rudolf Caracciola. Mercedes wanted to keep that rising client happy. Although he knew how to drive, Hitler never did. He said that if he had an accident, it would be a political problem. That's why he always travelled with chauffeurs, who also served as bodyguards. Before coming to power, he crossed Germany in those vehicles, sitting beside the driver with maps in hand, travelling thousands of kilometres. In 1942, he said, "I like cars. Some of the best moments of my life I've lived in one." When he came to power in 1933, his fleet expanded without limits. By 1935, 4 cars were assigned to his security team. The following year, there were already 8. In total, the Chancellery ordered more than 60 vehicles from Mercedes-Benz. Among all those models, the most extreme was the Mercedes-Benz 770W150. The first one was delivered in April of 1939. It was an improved version of the previous 770, with hydraulic brakes and reinforced suspension. But Hitler's cars had special extras: 40mm bulletproof glass, 18mm steel doors, reinforced tyres, and a floor with a 10mm steel plate. The goal was to withstand handgun fire and even up to half a kilo of explosives. All that armour made the car weigh over 5 tons. It barely managed 6 miles per gallon of gasoline. Despite that, Hitler was thrilled. When he saw the first model, he said, "From now on, I will only use this car." He was so pleased that he had others built to give to his allies. Only 10 were made, and they were given to leaders like Mannerheim in Finland, Antonescu in Romania, Quisling in Norway, Franco in Spain, and King Boris of Bulgaria. Despite his words, Hitler didn't always use that model. He also travelled in other armoured 540K models from the official fleet. Whenever he appeared in public, it was in a motorcade with several cars. One cleared the way, another carried him, and the others had his escorts. In 1938, a British observer wrote, "The line of black Mercedes moving forward was unsettling. They were armed with machine guns and let no one come close." However, it was unclear how much protection those cars really offered. Many were convertibles, and Hitler often stood up in the passenger seat to wave. In those conditions, anyone with a weapon could have attacked him. For him, being seen was more important than being protected. After the collapse of the regime in 1945, one of those Mercedes-Benz 770W150s was found in southern Germany near Salzburg. Troops from the 20th Armored Division of the United States discovered it on a rail platform, very close to the Berghof, Hitler's Alpine residence. The car had been hit by bullets and showed visible damage, but it was still operational. They repainted it in military colors and used it to transport US Army officers. That same year, the car crossed the Atlantic to the United States, where it took part in campaigns to sell war bonds. In 1956, it was auctioned off as military surplus in Maryland. A Canadian collector bought it for $725 and took it to Toronto. There, it was restored, though with some errors. A central light was added that wasn't part of the original design. In 1970, the vehicle became part of the collection of the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. At first, it was believed to have belonged to Hermann Göring, but in the 1980s, a museum researcher, Ludwig Koscher, checked the serial number and compared it with Daimler-Benz records. It was discovered that the car had been delivered directly to the Reich Chancellery on July 8, 1940. It was for Hitler's exclusive use. With that proof, years of confusion were corrected. The car didn't belong to Göring. It was one of the armoured vehicles Hitler used during the Third Reich. Since then, the museum has kept it as one of its centerpiece items. To this day, it remains on display, with its full history documented. Hitler's globe that a soldier took as a souvenir. In May of 1945, as the Allies advanced over what remained of the Third Reich, an American soldier entered Hitler's Alpine residence, the Berghof. There, in one of the rooms, he found a desktop globe placed on a piece of furniture next to a wooden chair. Without hesitation, he took it as a souvenir. This globe was not just any decoration. It was part of Hitler's working environment and had been used by him to study maps, review campaigns, and analyze routes. The soldier's name was John Barsamian, a veteran of the United States Army. He was 91 years old when he shared his story. He had kept the globe for decades and decided to sell it at auction due to his advanced age. The object had remained in his home, a silent witness to his passage through history, until he decided to part with it. The buyer was Robert Pritikin, a 78-year-old former publicist and friend of the veteran. He paid $100,000 plus a 15% commission to the auction house, bringing the total to $115,000. For Pritikin, it was not just a purchase. It was a direct piece from one of the darkest periods of the 20th century. According to his assistant, Matthew Davis, what made the object valuable was not the globe itself, but who had used it. That detail changed its value entirely. The model was common in its time, but the fact that it had been in Hitler's hands made it unique. During the Third Reich, Hitler regularly used this type of globe to visualize his military campaigns. He had several, both at the Berghof and the Chancellery. He liked to move them with his hands, point to areas with his finger, and make comments about territories he wanted to conquer or control. Although he often worked with maps spread out on the table, the globe was more practical for viewing the whole of Europe and comparing locations on a large scale. His aides knew he used it for planning and for making impromptu demonstrations to his visitors. The globe was not very large. It had a wooden base and a metal ring that held the sphere. The names of countries and cities were in German and showed borders as they were known before 1939. Some details were already outdated by the end of the war, but Hitler continued using it as a general reference. He consulted it especially during his days at the Berghof, when he received heads of state, generals, or political allies. There, in the mountainous setting, the globe served both as a tool and a symbol of his territorial ambition. The existence of this object became publicly known when the auction house announced it as the Berghof Globe. Some doubted its authenticity, but Barsamian's testimony and the provenance documents supported it. The veteran had taken the item directly from Hitler's residence in 1945. He had been there as part of the US military personnel that arrived in the area after the Germans had surrendered. The Berghof had been abandoned and looted. Many objects were taken by soldiers as personal trophies. Some vanished without a trace. Others, like this globe, resurfaced decades later. For years, Barsamian kept it in his living room without giving it much importance. Only in his later years did he decide to sell it. Its condition was acceptable. The base showed signs of aging, but the sphere remained intact. It had no signature or special markings, but it did show signs of use, according to experts that matched other objects known to be authentic. This was not the only globe linked to Hitler that circulated after the war. There are 2 other specimens attributed to the dictator. One was sold at an earlier auction in London, and another is in a military museum in Washington. But the one Barsamian kept for more than half a century is the only one whose provenance is documented directly from the Berghof, making it one of the most verifiable pieces. Interest in this type of object is not new. Since the end of the war, many of Hitler's belongings have been sought, bought or studied. Some are in private hands, others are in museums, still others were lost or destroyed. What's certain is that anything that was near him, even if not luxurious or exclusive, draws attention. Not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. In this case, a simple globe becomes a witness of power, propaganda and war. Today, the Berghof globe is part of a private collection. Pritikin keeps it as a historical object. He does not exhibit it publicly, but he allowed it to be documented and photographed. In his words, it is not a tribute, but a way to remember what happened. For him, keeping the globe is not about admiring who used it, but about better understanding how he thought. This object summarizes the contradiction of many Third Reich relics, ordinary pieces that, by being linked to Hitler, become uncomfortable, valuable, or dangerous depending on the context. The globe survived the fall of the regime, the looting, the dust of the years, and re-emerged as a historical piece. It says nothing by itself, but it shows that even silent objects have memory. Hitler's red telephone from which he gave his final orders. In the final days of the Nazi regime, as Berlin collapsed under the Soviet advance, Hitler took refuge in his underground bunker. 8 meters below ground, between reinforced concrete walls, he spent his hours giving orders, receiving reports and isolating himself from the downfall of his empire. Within that enclosed and dark space, one of the objects he used most was a red Bakelite telephone. It sat on a desk beside his usual chair and was the device from which he spoke with his generals, aides and, at times, his allies. This telephone, manufactured by Siemens, had the Nazi eagle insignia and swastika engraved on the back. Its appearance was simple, but its symbolic and operational weight was immense. It was a direct line to the outside world, to the offices of the High Command, to defense centers, and to the shelters of top leaders. From there, Hitler gave many of his final orders. Impossible maneuvers, non-existent defenses, instructions that no one could carry out, yet they kept coming from that phone until the end. When the Red Army took Berlin in May of 1945, several soldiers entered the bunker. They found documents, furniture, burned remains, and among it all, the telephone. One of the first officers to see it was a Soviet commander, but days later, the bunker's remains came under British control. That was when the telephone ended up in the hands of a British officer, Brigadier Ralph Rayner, who was in Germany on liaison duties. Rayner received the object as a gift from the Red Army. It was brought to the surface and handed to him as a war trophy. No one at the time imagined that this device would survive for decades or become one of the most representative objects of Hitler's bunker. Rayner took it to England and kept it in his country house, preserved as a relic of his brush with history. It remained there for more than 70 years until his family decided to sell it. In 2017, the telephone was auctioned in the United States. The auction house presented it as Hitler's telephone from the Berlin bunker, accompanied by documents confirming its origin. The piece included a letter from Rayner himself, describing how he had received the item and how he had been present at the site where it was found. There were also photographs of the phone in his home and customs records from its transport from Germany. The telephone was sold to a private buyer for the sum of $243,000, becoming one of the most expensive objects linked to the Nazi regime. Some questioned the ethics of selling such objects, but the auction house argued that this was history, not propaganda. The object, they said, spoke for itself. It glorified nothing. It simply showed the direct connection between a leader and his decisions. The device's design was typical of the time. The red bakelite was well preserved, though it showed signs of use and aging. The receiver was original, as was the braided cable. The engravings of the Third Reich were still visible on the base, and there was no doubt that it was a military phone, adapted for internal use by top command. Its direct connection to the bunker and to Hitler was backed by Rayner's testimony and by experts who analyzed the piece. Over the years, several phones have been attributed to Hitler. Some were found at the Reich Chancellery, others in special trains or in residences like the Berghof. But this one, in particular, was the phone he used in his final days, when there were no troops left, no hope, no room for negotiation. From this device came the orders to resist at all costs, even as the streets of Berlin were overrun and the sound of gunfire reached the bunker's door. The telephone became a symbol, not because of its technology, but because of the decisions made through it. From it came orders to execute deserters, move units that no longer existed, and reject negotiations. It became the final voice of a regime that refused to surrender, even when everything was lost. The object, simple in appearance, represents a direct link to absolute power, isolated and collapsing. After the auction, the new owner chose to keep it as part of a private collection. The object is not on public display, but it has been photographed, studied and documented by military history experts. Its existence reopened the debate about what to do with such pieces. Should they be shown in museums, kept in private collections, or removed entirely from circulation? For historians, the phone has concrete value. It shows how Hitler continued to give orders until the very last moment. He never gave up control, not even when it was clear that everything was over. He kept the phone close as a way to maintain command. Though no real options remained, he kept talking, as if he still commanded a full army. The bunker's remains were eventually sealed. Today that spot is a parking lot. Only a discreet plaque notes that this was where the Nazi regime ended. But the telephone survived. It was recovered, preserved, sold, and now forms part of the material record of history. It is not a neutral object. It is a tool that stood at the center of a chain of decisions that shaped all of Europe. For many, seeing that phone is to see the last thread of Hitler's power. It has no ornamentation, no luxury. It is red, heavy, marked with symbols of a fallen regime. But it represents the idea of total control until the last minute. That is why preserving it is not an act of nostalgia, it is a warning. A reminder that even the simplest objects can carry the weight of decisions that changed the world. Hitler's will. On the morning of April 29, 1945, as the sound of Soviet gunfire could already be heard just meters from the bunker, Hitler asked for paper, ink, and a secretary. He wanted to put his final decisions in writing before dying. He did so from his underground office, the same place where he had spent the last months hiding from defeat. He called his trusted typist, Traudl Junge, and dictated what would become his political testament and personal will. The document consisted of two parts. In the first, Hitler explained why he would not surrender. He stated that he preferred to die rather than be captured by the Soviets. He claimed that his death was a way to avoid falling into enemy hands and blamed the Jews for Germany's collapse. He also named his successors. He appointed Karl Dönitz as head of state and Joseph Goebbels as Chancellor of the Reich. In the second part, he left instructions regarding his personal belongings, including the donation of part of his art collection to the future museum in Linz, an idea he had long envisioned. The secretary wrote everything quickly. Hitler dictated calmly, as if there were no urgency, even though Berlin outside was in ruins. When he finished, he asked for the text to be printed in several copies. He then signed each one with a steady hand, though his physical deterioration was already noticeable. These were the Nazi regime's final official words, a last message written when there were no troops, no allies, and no territory left to defend. The copies were distributed. One was given to Heinz Lorenz, another to Arthur Axmann, and the third to Colonel Wilhelm Zander. All three were tasked with leaving the bunker and delivering the documents to the new leaders, or at the very least, to Allied authorities. They left disguised, using secondary routes, and managed to avoid checkpoints. Each hid his copy in a different place. For months, it was unknown whether these pages had survived the fall of the Third Reich. In December of 1945, British authorities captured Zander in southern Germany. Among his belongings, they found a suitcase with papers. Upon inspection, they realized they were holding Hitler's will. The document was quickly taken to London, where document specialists authenticated it. The handwriting, seals, and writing style all matched. It was original. That same year, the British decided to make it public. They released it to the international press, and it was published in several newspapers. The contents made an impact. It was the first time the world read directly the dictator's final words. Although it changed nothing about the outcome of the war, it helped reveal how he thought until the very end. There was no regret, no doubt, no revision, only the same ideas repeated once again. After its publication, the document remained in military custody. For a time, it was archived in London at a documentation office of the Ministry of Defence. Later, it was transferred to the United Kingdom's National Archives, where it was catalogued as a historical record. The original copy that had been in Zander's possession was preserved in a special folder, protected from deterioration. 2 other copies were also located, Lorenz's and Axmann's, though in worse condition. Years later, a typed copy was transferred to the Nuremberg Trials Archive. There it was presented as part of the material demonstrating the structure of the Nazi regime. It was not used directly as evidence against the accused, but as political context showing that Hitler had not relinquished power democratically, but had planned continuity for his closest collaborators. In the document, Hitler did not mention Eva Braun, although they had married just hours before he dictated it. Nor did he mention the genocide or the military campaigns that ended in defeat. He only spoke of loyalty, struggle, betrayal, and the need to carry on the legacy. In his personal will, he did leave instructions regarding his private property. He wanted his most valuable belongings not to fall into enemy hands. He asked that his and Eva Braun's remains be burned and that some items be given to his family or closest staff. Despite his wishes, most of his belongings were seized by Allied forces. The Linz Museum was never built. His residence was destroyed. His artworks ended up in the hands of the US Army, which moved them to special storage sites. His bank accounts were frozen. The only thing fully preserved was the document he signed on his final night. Today, Hitler's will is kept in 3 different archives. Zander's copy is in the United Kingdom's National Archives. Lorenz's was given to a German foundation. Axmann's is in the archives of the United States Army. All are under protection, scanned, preserved and available for research, though they are not always on display. The document has been reproduced in books, documentaries and historical studies. It is not a curiosity, but a key element that helps close the circle of Nazi power. Written at a time when everything was already lost, the will does not seek reconciliation nor offer explanations. It is a final reaffirmation of his ideology without nuance, a cold, emotionless piece, drafted as if he were still leading a state that no longer existed. For historians, this object is essential, not only for its documentary value, but because it reflects the mindset with which Hitler faced his final hours. He did not surrender, did not admit mistakes, did not alter his rhetoric. He died repeating what he had said for years, and left it written down with the same enemies, the same ideas, and the same orders. That paper survived the bombings, the escapes, the looting, and the passage of time. It is one of the few personal objects that accurately reflect how Hitler wanted to be remembered. That is why its value lies not in the paper or the signature, but in the confirmation that until the very end, he did not change a single word. Hitler's small brush used to groom his mustache. Though it may seem like a minor detail, this object represents one of the most visually recognizable features of the dictator. His short moustache, trimmed into a narrow rectangle, was an essential part of his image for decades, and this brush, found among his belongings at the Berghof by American soldiers, was part of his daily grooming routine. The brush was simple, made with materials common for the time. The handle was polished wood, darkened slightly from use. The bristles were boar hair, arranged in tight rows. It had no visible maker's mark, no decorations, no personalization. Unlike other items belonging to Hitler, such as his monogrammed dinnerware or luxury pens, this piece was not ostentatious. It was functional, direct and discreet. However, it was stored in a brown leather case alongside other grooming tools, indicating that it was part of a set he used regularly. Members of Hitler's inner circle often commented on his obsession with appearance. Though he avoided makeup or strong perfumes, he was extremely strict about his hair and mustache. He maintained a personal care routine that he followed almost without variation. Each morning after breakfast, he would spend several minutes in front of the mirror, adjusting every detail. The moustache required specific attention. He used small scissors to trim it, and then the brush to shape it. According to personal aides like Heinz Linger, Hitler was extremely meticulous. He didn't let anyone else touch his brush. He kept it himself in a locked drawer and cleaned it often. It wasn't uncommon to see him rubbing the bristles with a dry cloth after use. He had several identical copies, but always used the same one unless he was traveling. In those cases, he carried a travel version wrapped in cloth. The brush was recovered by a US officer in May of 1945. It was part of the items gathered from the Berghof before the complex was looted and burned. The soldier took it without knowing exactly what it was, thinking it might be a beard or hairbrush. Years later, when comparing it with photos of Hitler using grooming items, its specific use for the mustache was confirmed. The object changed hands over time until it ended up in a private collection in Texas. Though small, the brush represents a symbol of identity. Hitler's mustache has been the subject of satire, propaganda, imitation, and analysis. But for him, its upkeep was serious. He never let it grow beyond a few millimeters. The exact shape he used, known in English as the toothbrush moustache, had been popular before the war, but eventually became almost exclusively associated with him. Charlie Chaplin wore it in jest, and later openly rejected it. Many actors have refused to wear it, due to what it represents. Studies on the aesthetics of Nazism have also noted how Hitler's physical image, including his moustache, was carefully constructed to project a mix of authority, simplicity, and rigidity. Nothing was spontaneous. Every visual detail was designed to reinforce his image as a leader. The brush, therefore, was part of that construction. It wasn't just a personal item, it was a tool of image-making. The current owner allowed the brush to be studied by experts on Third Reich artifacts. It was confirmed that the type of wood and shape of the bristles matched German personal care items from the 1930s and 40s. Wear analysis also indicated prolonged use. There were no markings that confirmed 100% that Hitler had used it, but its direct provenance from the Berghof and the match with photographs of the dictator provided strong support. The brush was briefly offered at auction in 2003, but was withdrawn after pressure from groups opposed to the commercialization of Nazi-linked objects. Since then, it has been kept in a private setting, not publicly displayed. Photographs have been taken, and its condition has been documented. The current owner has expressed no intention to sell, and has only allowed access for academic purposes. Unlike other items such as weapons, uniforms, or official documents, this brush has no direct military or political use. However, its value lies in symbolism. It shows how even the most mundane items can be part of the machinery of power. For Hitler, image care was no small matter. It was a tool of control. The moustache was not just facial hair, it was a trademark. And this brush, used every day to maintain that mark, is a silent reminder of how personal image can be part of a regime. It is not known how many of Hitler's grooming items have survived. Many were destroyed, lost, or hidden. Others, like this one, have endured in silence. They hold no gold, power, or technology, but they carry the weight of history. The brush, small, simple for daily use, was part of the routine of one of the most destructive leaders of the 20th century. Today, its existence does not inspire admiration but discomfort. It is a piece that forces us to remember that symbols are not always grand. Sometimes they lie in the details, in the smallest, most trivial things. This object, without saying a word, connects to a face the world has not forgotten, a face whose image was constructed in part with this brush. The gold medal of the failed 1923 coup. After the failed coup attempt in Munich in November of 1923, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, the Nazi regime found a way to turn that defeat into a symbol of pride. In 1934, a decade after the event, Hitler decided to create a commemorative medal to honor those who had taken part in that attempt to seize power. This object, made of gilded metal with detailed craftsmanship, gained a special place within the party's cult of symbolism. The medal was personally awarded by Hitler to a select group. Only those who had participated in the 1923 coup and remained loyal to the party in the years that followed received it. In total, about 1,500 people were recognized with this medal. The award was not automatic. Each case was evaluated, and only those who met specific criteria were granted the distinction. The design was carefully crafted to reflect the party's values and the significance of the event. The piece was oval-shaped, measuring 38 by 33 millimeters and weighing 19 grams. On the front, it featured a raised military helmet set atop a wreath of oak leaves. Below it appeared the date 9 November 1923. On the reverse side, a large swastika dominated the space. Above it were the names of the martyrs of the coup, especially the 16 who had died and became symbolic figures of the movement. At the bottom, the phrase "Und ihr habt doch gesiegt," and yet you have triumphed, was inscribed. Each medal came with a certificate signed by Hitler. This document formalized the award and explained the reason for the recognition. It was not just any medal. Within the party, it was considered a high-level distinction. Those who wore it were seen as original members of the movement, people who had been there from the beginning. They were respectfully referred to as old fighters of the party. There were also strict rules for wearing the medal. It could only be displayed at specific party events, such as the annual commemorations of the Putsch in Munich. It had to be worn on the left side of the chest, above other insignias. Unauthorized individuals were not permitted to wear a replica. It was an internal identity symbol, establishing hierarchies among Nazi party members. One of the most curious aspects of the medal was its manufacture. Though it appeared to be gold, it was actually made of a gold-colored alloy with an aged finish. This gave it an antique and serious appearance. It was produced by the firm Deschler & Son, based in Munich, the same company that manufactured many other Third Reich insignias. Each unit was numbered and recorded to prevent forgery or misuse. Over time, the medal became a cult object within the party. Recipients were invited to special events and received certain privileges within the regime's hierarchy. They were even spoken of as a kind of elite within Nazism. Owning that medal meant being part of the movement's hardcore from the very start. By the end of the war, many of these medals had disappeared. Some were buried by their owners, others lost during bombings or evacuations. Some were deliberately destroyed to avoid identification as former Nazi party members. However, several examples survived. Some were found by Allied soldiers in 1945 among the ruins of official buildings or in the belongings of captured high-ranking officers. Over the years, the Putsch medal became a sought-after item among military memorabilia collectors. It appeared in private auctions, specialized dealers, and personal collections. One of the best-preserved examples is now housed at the Imperial War Museum in London. It was donated by a British veteran who had recovered it in 1945 after entering a party building in Bavaria. The piece was authenticated and now forms part of a permanent exhibition on propaganda and Nazi symbols. Another example was found in Austria, on an abandoned estate near Linz. It was discovered by a farmer while repairing a barn. The medal was inside a metal box alongside other party documents. After being examined by local authorities, its authenticity was confirmed. It was then donated to a regional museum for preservation. Today, the Munich Putsch medal continues to generate debate. Some view it as a historical piece that helps explain how the regime built its internal narrative. Others see it as a symbol of fanaticism that should not be displayed. Whatever the viewpoint, it's a fact that this object encapsulates a key stage in German history, the transition from a small fringe movement to a totalitarian dictatorship. The object no longer represents loyalty or recognition. It is now part of the material archive of an era defined by extremism. Its existence helps reconstruct history through tangible remnants, what remained in the hands, the uniforms, and the pockets of those who were part of the regime. In that sense, more than an award, the Putsch medal has become a silent witness to a political ambition that ended in ruin. Over time, many objects that once belonged to Hitler managed to escape the inner circle of power. Each one served as a silent witness to a period that affected millions. From a simple box of watercolors to the telephone he used in his final days, all these items were found in bunkers, offices, residences, and devastated camps following the fall of the regime. None of these objects were created to outlast the Third Reich itself, yet some survived by chance, by looting, or by the decision of those who discovered them. Many were hidden, sold, gifted, or kept in secret. Today, most are housed in museums, private collections, or official archives, where they no longer represent power or authority, but stand as physical evidence of a dictatorship that collapsed from within. Each recovered item does not speak of ideals or ideologies, but of control, ambition, and propaganda. This exploration of what was left behind does not seek admiration or condemnation. It simply reveals, through facts and without interpretation, what truly happened to the dictator's personal belongings after the war.